Hi, everybody. Welcome to this interview with Chip Conley, performed by Marci Alboher. I'm so excited to be here today and to see all of you. If you haven't already had a chance to introduce yourself in the chat, please do so. Share where you're calling in from and what you're excited to learn about today. Just a couple of technical notes before we get started. First, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Duncan. I'm on the communications team at cogenerate.org, or not .org, cogenerate, and I love to be part of these events. Great to be here. First, please add your questions throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. Marci, the moderator, is going to be weaving in and out, incorporating those questions into the conversation. Secondly, we are recording the session, and we're going to include it in our follow-up email. So if you have to leave early, know that you'll be able to tune back in and watch the rest of the conversation. Finally, we do have automatic closed captions available. If you want to hide those, just select hide captions. And that's it. I'm going to pass it over to Marci.
Thanks so much, Duncan, and welcome everyone. I'm Marci Alboher, and I lead the narrative and community work here at CoGenerate, a national nonprofit supporting older and younger change makers working to bridge divides and co-create a better future. It is a great privilege today to introduce Chip Conley, a CoGenerate board member and a dear friend who's become a teacher to me and to so many others. Chip is here with us today to talk about his new book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. You may have seen Chip recently on the Today Show with Hoda and Jenna, or Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos, or read about him in countless media outlets that have covered the book. This book is Chip's seventh. In addition to his prolific writing, which I read every day now, Chip is an entrepreneur who has been a disruptor at least 3 times in the hospitality industry. First, as the founder of Joie de Vivre Hospitality. Next, as Airbnb's head of strategy. And most recently, he co-founded MEA, the world's first wisdom school dedicated to midlife transition, where I am proud to serve on the faculty, especially because their physical campuses are in Baja, Mexico and Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have only a half hour together today, so please share any reactions or questions you have in the chat. I'm going to weave your questions in throughout, and I promise you we'll leave with some new ideas, whether you're in the midst of midlife, looking ahead, working with people in midlife, in relationship with people in midlife, all of those things. And if you see me looking over to the right, I have a screen on the side, and that's where I'll be able to monitor what's happening in the chat. So I'll be doing a lot of back and forthing. So Chip, come on to the main screen with me.
Yay!
Welcome.
Love you, Marci.
So it's so good to be here with you. Since I know you're willing, I want to go deep quickly. At MEA, we play a game called If You Really Knew Me. And I want to play it with you here today. So let's start our conversation with that prompt and tell us why you like it.
So, hi, everybody. My name is Chip. And if you really knew me, you'd know I am raw and imperfect. And that feels really good to me these days. If 25 years ago, I'm 63 today. If I said that at 38, I'd feel like, ooh, something's broken. I'm wrong. And I do think that one of the parts of midlife is to really get clear on like who you are, what you're supposed to be doing here on Earth, and your shadow side. And I know that for me, there's times I feel very raw, and especially in the last few months as I've been dealing with cancer treatments. And I'm imperfect because, gosh, what a liberation to know I don't have to be perfect. And so I like that question, and it really comes to give credit to it too. MTV had a program about kids, teenagers asking that question to each other. And I like it partly because If You Really Knew Me comes from the place of like, hey, don't judge me based upon my color, my skin, my age, my gender, what I look like, socioeconomically. Don't even judge me. Maybe be an enlightened witness for what I'm going to tell you right now about myself, coming from, not my facts of my life or the stories of life, but something deeper. And, to have deep conversations with people where you get to know people from the inside out, that's really what MEA is all about. And I think it's really what midlife and later is all about as well.
Yeah, I've loved playing that game with you. We're going to stop at 1 round, but at MEA, we go deeper. So the next round would be, if you really knew me, if you really, really knew me, if you really, really, really knew me, and we go around and it is quite a quick get to know you.
And we end up in the hot tub. No, I'm kidding.
So let's define terms. I'm sure a lot of people have been asking you,
Yeah.
you've said midlife needs a rebranding. How do you define midlife and how long is it?
So midlife, I didn't have this quote for the book. I now have it. That's what happens when you write a book, and you have to finish it a year in advance. Midlife is quite simple. It is the bridge, the span between early adulthood and later adulthood. Wow, what a surprise. Midlife would be that span. The reason it's a very relevant stage is because as we're living longer, that span is getting longer. And so midlife 100 years ago might have lasted 15 years. Today, it might last 40 years. And some sociologists think it lasts from 35 to 75. So I do believe that as a life stage, midlife is very underloved and underappreciated and frankly understudied. And so part of the reason we created the world's first midlife wisdom school, MEA, the Modern Elder Academy, and I wrote this book, Learning to Love Midlife, was to try to actually help to rebrand midlife so it's not a crisis, but it's a chrysalis. It's that, in between stage, the liminal stage between the caterpillar and the butterfly, or between early adulthood and later adulthood. And during that stage, there's a lot going on, a lot of transitions going on. And most of us have never learned a thing about how to navigate midlife transitions.
So that's, I know, your expertise, but yet your entry into midlife was complicated. You open the book by saying, right, it is a tale of two midlives for you. Yeah. It was one very good and one very bad. Can you frame that up a little?
Yeah, the very bad one was first. Well, if it starts at 35, then, I had 35 to 45 were pretty good. I enjoyed that period. But I was pretty ego fed, I will say. And I still am occasionally. Like, it's not like you get rid of it. But I was successful. I was writing books. I was building a company. I was a pioneer in the boutique hotel space. And then in my late 40s, everything fell, all the wheels fell off the wagon. And in all parts of my life, things fell apart. And including having an NDE, a near-death experience, due to an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, which, was like the hotelier wake-up call. Okay, my life is not working. At 47, I had to say, like, okay, how am I going to do my great midlife edit to determine what needs to actually be jettisoned in my life. And so I did get to the other side of that at age 50. I spent 2 years doing what we now call a midlife atrium, which was to create space to sort of imagine what's next. And, you have to be privileged to be able to do that, because if you don't have time in your life and you're paycheck to paycheck, you can't do that. But you can do it on a weekend, or you can do it by actually saying, I'm going to take a day and be off digital devices. I'm going to do a Sabbath of digital. And during that day, I'm going to actually spend time asking myself some deeper questions. And many of the questions that I ask in the book, Learning to Love Midlife, are the kind of questions that are meant for people to ask without distraction. And so my 50s turned out to be my favorite decade on all levels. And yes, it was very fortunate. I got tapped on the shoulder by the young founders of Airbnb to help them, steer their rocket ship of their company. But I joined when it was like a tiny little tech startup, and I was the modern elder, the person they said was as curious as they were wise. But I was curious because at 52, I'd never worked in a tech company before, so I didn't understand any of the lingo. So I just believe that midlife as a life stage, it has three parts to it. It has, for those of you trying to understand, like, okay, well, 40 years is a long time, Chip. There's early midlife, which is often 35 to 50, often a difficult period. The U curve of happiness research basically shows that you're in a long, slow decline in life satisfaction from our early 20s till 45 to 50. Then there's the core of midlife, which is our 50s. And that's an era where, frankly, you're really in transition. A lot of changes being made. And in my opinion, and according to Richard Rohr and Carl Jung, it's when the primary operating system in your life moves from the ego to the soul. And then there's later midlife, 60 to 75. And that's the period where and I'm 63 now, so I'm in that period. And it's when you're starting to imagine, how do you want to curate your later years? And so I do believe that we're seeing that the retirement age is definitely going up. And so I think people in their 50s may start thinking about retirement at that point, but more and more people are saying like, I'm not going to retire until my 70s by choice or necessity. And so that later midlife is a period where you're still operating, maybe working, still doing a lot of things you used to do, but starting to actually make some fundamental changes of where you live, how you spend your time, and maybe you start introducing some time affluence into your life.
Mm. So much to unpack there. So you touched on the Airbnb story, and I want to just stay there for a moment because it's a pretty fascinating thing, and it's where the modern elder language came from.
Yep, yep.
So talk a little bit about why we need a new phrase, the modern elder, and how what you did at Airbnb as a model, maybe for others.
Well, so an elder, elder is different than elderly. Elderly is often the last 5-10 years of your life, and you maybe in a stage where you really need some interdependence to get by. But an elder is a relative term. So Tom Brady, as an NFL football quarterback, was an elder at 42 as a pro football player, and a Silicon Valley software engineer might be an elder at 35 when they're surrounded by 25-year-olds. So for me at Airbnb, I was 52, average age in the company was 26. So yeah, I was an elder, but I was not an elder of the past. The elder of the past is, there's reverence for them. I needed to focus on relevance, not reverence. And so that meant I needed to be curious about my surroundings and maybe listen a lot. My job was not to dispense wisdom. It was really to understand the context, that I was in at Airbnb. And then once I understood my context, I could maybe ask some great questions because knowledge speaks and wisdom listens. And listening to listening to what's going on, you can ask great questions. So that experience was amazing. And I love the intergenerational, I mean, from a CoGenerate perspective, the intergenerational collaboration experience of being with mostly millennials, and a lot of them half my age, and being mentoring and being mentored. I coined a term called menturn, which means you're a mentor and an intern at the same time. And so whether it was Brian Chesky, the CEO, who I was mentoring, but I was also reporting to him, and he was 21 years younger than me, I was learning things from him, and he was learning things from me. And I do think that's the future of intergenerational collaboration in the workplace, is mutual mentorship. How do we match people such the yin and the yang sort of like come together and like, I know this, you know that, teach me that, and I'll teach you this. And so we can actually learn how to do that in companies. So important with 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. And I also learned how to be age fluid, a term that I'm sort of coining out there. And to be age fluid means that you are not necessarily defined by your chronological age or your generation. You're all the ages you've ever been or will ever be. And you see your age as almost a costume that you can put on and take off if you want. And the premise of this is that, you're not defined by your age. Now, in the past, you might have said that person's ageless, but I don't like the term ageless because it suggests that age is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Less age. And if that's a good thing, then that means that age is a bad thing. And as I say, as the subtitle of the book, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, I do think there's a lot of things get better with age. And we just, as a society, Hallmark Cards has sort of owned the narrative, which is, age is a terrible thing. And you should feel embarrassed about it or shameful about it.
Yeah.
I'll say quickly.
Yeah.
George Stephanopoulos, you can find his age on Google. So right before I went on stage on Good Morning America with him, and I asked the producer, I'm going to just bring up George's age because he's a year younger than me. And she looked at me like, are you kidding me?
Wow.
No.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, interesting. I'm going on stage to talk about, age and give a pro-aging, not an anti-aging message. And she's not allowing me to actually bring up something about George, who happens to be younger than me, even though all that information is on Google. So we have such a shame around age.
Yeah. Duncan and I do a lot of speaking together these days. We have this CoGenerate at Work workshop that we do, and we open up each workshop with like, hi, I'm Marci, I'm 57. Hi, I'm Duncan and I'm 30. And we joke that like Duncan started dyeing his hair at just the time I stopped dyeing mine. So he became 10 for Halloween. You'll see him again at the end. But I think it's really important, like we in our space, like I think it's our responsibility to be really open about our age too. I look at My mom has started claiming her age when she
She's
turns
age
80.
fluid. She just wrote in here. She's
My mom has
82 years
always
old.
been age fluid. Yes, I'm hoping she's on here to hear her being shouted at.
She's here. Yes.
Yeah, I hope she's here. So I think you've talked a little bit about why older and young people need each other, but I love the way you talk about the different kinds of intelligences that older and younger bring. Could you just share a little about that too?
Yeah, I mean, so before I ever wrote or read Arthur Brooks' book From Strength to Strength, which really captures this, I was noticing that there were things that younger people in the workplace were really good at. They were really fast and focused, and they were exceptional at being able to go deep on something quickly. But they often didn't have peripheral vision. They had a harder time seeing, like, if we do this, what will be the implication out there in the future? And they tend to focus more on what was right in front of their face. Let me get a little bit of water here. And then about a month after I joined Airbnb, I was initially head of global hospitality. About a month afterwards, after I joined, Brian said to me, you know what, I'm going to make you in charge of strategy too, because I love the way your mind works. You think systemically and holistically, like you can connect the dots, and you're sort of like, you're a systems thinker. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you. I'd never really thought of that. And then I read Arthur Brooks' book later, and I was like, oh, okay. Fluid intelligence is when you're fast and focused, and you tend to be really good at solving problems and doing it relatively quickly. Crystallized intelligence is using four-wheel drive of your brain. Because as you get older, your brain shrinks a little bit, and you're more adept at going from left brain to right brain. So it means you can actually think alchemically, left brain, right brain. You're not so segregated. And in so doing, you can actually come up with new sort of conceptual blockbusting ideas and ways of looking at things that allow you to connect the dots. And that's something that gets better with age. And a lot of people don't know that. And that's the kind of information I have in the book, is like, okay, well, there's lots of reasons: social science, physical science, my own personal experience, and 4,000 alumni from 47 countries who've gone through MEA. We've been able to say, like, hey, there's a lot of things that get better with age. You just don't know about them, or you sort of see them in your own life, but you don't have language for them.
Yeah. So you get kind of tapped on the shoulder by Brian Chesky of Airbnb. Yeah. How could the rest of us kind of position ourselves to get sought out by younger people?
Well, I think let's recognize that ageism happens in both directions. Ageism can happen toward young people too. You see it sometimes in politics, like, and hey, you haven't seen this, the way the world works. Or if you're in an old school company, like, okay, you pay your dues for 10 years. And so ageism can happen in both directions. Now, what we are more familiar with is ageism happening more and more toward older people, especially in the workplace, as people want to, by choice or necessity, stay in the workplace longer. The most important piece of advice I ever heard about this came from one of the most famous executive recruiters in the world. And she said, Chip, what people need to do as they get older is they need to show up with curiosity and a passionate engagement for what they do. And if you do that, whether it's in your work or in a job interview or in an email that you're sending to someone curious about a job, if you show up with curiosity and passionate engagement, people won't notice your wrinkles. They'll notice your energy. And so your energy is something that is noticeable. And once a person sort of feels like that person's energetic, they're curious, they don't fit the profile of the myth I have or the stereotype I have, that someone who gets older is stuck in their ways, not open to learning something new, not curious, and not very self-aware. And like, okay, yeah, I wouldn't want to hire that kind of person either. But if you show up with the opposite of those and learn how to own that. I mean, if you just sort of ape it, like, okay, I'll do that, I'll imitate it for a day, that won't go very well once you're hired, because you'll get into the place and you'll be like, everybody will go, okay, boomer, you're telling us how the world used to work. And so the key on all of this is to actually look at how do you develop your curiosity muscle. And Scott Shigeoka has a great book called Seek about how to do that, that came out just a few months ago. And he's a friend of both Marci and mine, and highly recommend you read that book, because I think that's a great primer to actually shift your mindset. Then the next thing you have to do is you have to figure out, if you're looking for a job, where is the network of people who are going to consider you? And, it's often the second or the third degree of separation that's going to work for you. It's not necessarily your core group of people. And start spending time in those places. I have a good friend who's 60 years old, and she wanted to get into tech, and she'd never been in tech. She'd been in the hospitality industry, so I knew her well. And I just said, like, here are the events that are sort of like social events in San Francisco where younger tech people come together. And she just said, like, okay, I'm diving in. Will you come with me to the first one? And introduced me to a few people, and I did. And guess what? After about 3 months of looking, it took her a little while. She got a job in a role that is very crystallized intelligence based. It's sort of a strategic, futurist kind of look at that company. It actually happens to be Salesforce. So that she's actually sort of a futurist at Salesforce, and that's beautiful.
I love that story. I have a few questions, and we're inching close to the end, but I want to
Okay.
ask a question that came in from
Yes.
someone from Burns here. Said, Chip, this is something that I'm deeply interested in as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the recent blossoming of midlife transition programs, sometimes called encore transition programs, in
Yes.
colleges and universities. What, in your opinion, are examples of the best practices for bringing cogeneration into these midlife programs in a deliberative and constructive way?
Yeah, for those who don't know them, you could go to the Nexel Collaborative. Just do and that'll show you all of the different kinds of programs. Stanford's program is called Distinguished Careers Institute. Harvard's is the Advanced Leadership Initiative. It's very encouraging. These programs are oriented toward people who want to come back and live on campus for a year, go to classes, accumulate knowledge in classes on subjects that they might not have taken when they were 20, but now at 60 they would take. And they're in a cohort of fellows, and they're learning and they're learning with younger people. They're also going through life journeys together. I think the programs are great. I think the biggest challenge with those programs, they're extremely expensive. And, some people say that they're a bit elitist because of the fact that not that many people can actually afford the time or the money to go do those programs. And we love them because we have a great relationship with the Nexel Collaborative, all these different organizations, because we're sort of the scaling. We're like the Volkswagen, they're the Mercedes-Benz. So we're the ones trying to figure out how to scale this so that more people can actually experience this kind of thing. But these kinds of programs are dedicated to helping people say, I want to shift my life. And like Encore.org previously did and still does in Encore Fellows programs, it's like, I want to give back. I want to actually take what I've learned along the way and share it with others in a way that makes the world a better place.
Two things there's a question I had and a question I'm seeing somebody else had too. We've been focusing so much on midlife, but it gets me thinking about the next stage of life. And the first question, I think I can weave these together. The first question is, what is the role of intergenerational connection in the other direction? Like when we're in midlife, how important do you think it is to be connecting with our elders? And what is your role of people? I've got a few people who've posted like, I'm in my 70s, I'm in my early 90s. How do I kind of take advantage of all of this?
So first of all, we're all supposed to learn from each other. There's a new generational compact that we're supposed to have. We're supposed to have this intergenerational potluck. We even created a program called Generations Over Dinner. Take a look at, do a Google search for generationsoverdinner.com and look at that, because I think it's a great way for the generations to come together and have deep and meaningful conversations about how to help change the world. We all are supposed to learn from each other, and at any age. And so when you're in midlife, you're sort of like at that bridge between the younger and the older. And therefore, in some ways, you have a good adjacency to see both sides. And that's one of the beauties of being in midlife, is you understand you're still close enough to what it was like when you were 20 to sort of remember it well and to feel it. But you also are able to look at what your life's going to be like at 80 and say like, okay, I know what my parents are like. And for many of us, this comes true as the sandwich generation, where we're taking care of, we're in a caregiving role for older and younger at the same time. I just think, again, I think the idea that our age defines us in certain ways, mostly physically. You know, there are all the, I have a Wisdom Well daily blog coming out on Monday, an open letter to the tech bros who want to biohack their way to never dying. Check it out. For those of you who don't know my blog, it's called Wisdom Well. It's on the MEA website. It's a free subscription, and it comes out every day. But I think we're so focused on the length of life that we need to focus more on the depth of life. And I think you can focus on the depth of life at any age. And I think what Laura Carstenson's work at the Stanford Center on Longevity shows is the less life you have ahead of you, the less focused you are on the future and the more focused you are on the present moment and maybe your relationships. And in so focusing on the present moment and relationships, you're happier. And so how could we all learn something from that at any age?
Chip, I want to end us on time. I promise we're doing these interviews now in 30-minute quick in and out. So
Yep.
before we hand it back to Duncan, 2 questions that I can tie in.
I'll be brief.
Yael asked us, can you talk about the importance of play? And I know you have opinions on that. And I was going to ask you if you could leave us with an at-home practice. Can you maybe marry the two?
Good question. Well, let me start. I don't know if I can marry two, but I'll do two quick answers. Okay. So Plato said a long time ago, you can learn a lot more about a person in an hour of play than a year of conversation. And I think there's something to that. Although I think if it's a deep conversation, it can still be very meaningful. Play is a big part of MEA. And what we have something called type 2 fun, which is you're doing something that's not necessarily easy, maybe even feels like you're a beginner and you're sort of not good at it. But after you've done it, you feel like, oh my God, that was great. We need to learn how to play more because play is a form of a growth mindset. It allows you to improve and get better and not be so self-critical. Your other question was a question to leave people with. Here's the question I would leave people with. It's one of my favorite questions at MEA, and it's in the book. And the book, Learning to Love Midlife, is full of questions. What is it that you know now or have done now that you wish you'd learned or done 10 years ago? Figure that out for a second. And then moving forward, 10 years from now, what will you regret if you don't learn it or do it now? This is a great way for someone to actually learn how to become a beginner again, because anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. And this is how at age 57, I learned to surf, starting to surf, and Spanish, because I imagined at 67, it would not be any easier.
At 57, I'm going to recommit to Spanish, I think.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to hand it over to Duncan, but Chip, thank you for all you've done to really help us think differently about aging, midlife, and really embracing all of life's chapters. And thanks to Duncan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marci, and to both of you for this incredible conversation. I hope you will all order Chip's book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. I'm going to include the link in the chat here. It's also going to be in the follow-up email. And make sure to take a look at the upcoming offerings from MEA. I also highly recommend, as Marci mentioned, Chip's daily blog, Wisdom Well. Keeping your eyes open for emails about more upcoming events from CoGenerate, and I will see you there. Thanks again.
Thanks, Duncan. Thanks, Marci.
Guys. Bye, everyone.